Sound check. Hey, good evening, everybody. Happy Cinco de Mayo. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with the Wellness Way, Yorkville. Happy Monday, guys. I hope you guys had a great weekend. And welcome to tonight's live broadcast, in which I will be answering some of your questions tonight. I'm going to go over a couple of things first with some questions that I've gotten during the week. If you're watching right now, just make sure that you say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you want your question answered, drop it in the comments. Right now, I'll only be answering questions during the live broadcast. And when I finish up with everything, I'll go back and look at the questions to see if I'll be able to answer those. So if you're watching right now, again, say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. But tonight, I'm going to go over some interesting questions that I've gotten during the week. Some of them are probably going to ruffle your feathers a little bit with my response. And I'll explain to you why. And a lot of the answers that I have to the questions, they'll probably need a 3-hour explanation, but I don't have 3 hours to do it. So I'll go through it very, very quickly. So live question and answer. And again, if you got a question, just go ahead and start dropping it in the comments. I'll go back and make sure that I can try to answer that when I finish up with everything. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. And again, coming up, if you're from the Chicagoland area, our next inflammation event is going to be Tuesday, May 20th. So that's 2 weeks from tomorrow at 6 o'clock p.m. This is an in-person event, just so you know that. Tuesday, May 20th. And this is specifically if you want to work with our approach and, who needs to be there. I think everybody needs to be there in order to understand what health is, where it comes from, and how you actually start creating health versus trying to treat disease, all the time. But we do get a lot of people who have issues with, weight loss resistance, or they have, problems conceiving, or they had some kind of thyroid issue, or they may have blood sugar issues, or some kind of autoimmunity or something that's going on with their hormones. If that's you, and you're tired of doing the same thing over and over and getting the same result, then I want you to register for that right now. Get to that event. However, I will tell you this: we had a couple of individuals who drove about an hour and a half in order to get that, and they wanted that time not as the inflammation talk. They wanted that time in order to ask all these questions in regards to their health issues. And guys, I don't answer your questions in regards to your health issues. That's called a consult, and you'll have to schedule that. Um, but um, um, but the purpose of that is for you to start thinking differently and start looking at health from a different perspective. And the reason why we're able to solve problems that other people haven't been able to solve isn't because we have miraculous herbs, it's because we start looking at things from a lot different perspective. So if that's you and you need a different approach, make sure you get registered for our next inflammation event. It's going to be Tuesday, May 20th, 6:00 p.m. This is an in-person event. All you have to do is if you go to our Linktree profile, you'll be able to see that pop up very, very first, the inflammation event. Just click on that. That will take you to our Eventbrite page, take you 60 seconds to register for it. And then a member of my staff will be reaching out probably a little bit closer to the event just to confirm your attendance at that event. We do have a gift for you at the inflammation event. So make sure you get registered for that, please, please. Okay. In addition to that, if you want to know a different perspective, because people ask me all the time, hey, can I pick your brain? And I tell them, nope, you can't pick my brain. Otherwise, I would be, answering questions on email, answering questions on social media, answering questions all the time. But just remember, I do have a family of 4. I am in full-time practice. So my time is very, very limited. However, if you want to start understanding how to take a different approach when it comes to your health, then yes, you can go on to TWW Plus. This is on the school app, SKOOL. And this, when you buy a membership for even for a whole entire year, there's enough stuff to keep you engaged for a whole entire year. Our Untox Challenge is on there. You'll see a lot of notes from our leadership and longevity seminar that we just had just last weekend. Plus, there's just tons and tons of videos on there that will help you to start see things from a different perspective. I think this is really, really awesome. There's so much content on there, guys, that if you try to pick my brain for a half an hour, there is several hours of stuff on there just to start helping you think a little bit differently. And remember this, you cannot solve your problems with the same level of thinking that created the problem. And that's why we always talk about thinking differently. And so if you want to go and get that Wellness Way membership, if you go to Linktree, you can click on our Linktree profile, you'll see this come up. All you do is click on that. And pretty much, guys, probably cheaper than a price of a consult, will get you a whole year membership to the school app, to TWW Plus. And that way you can just start digesting all kinds of awesome information to help you to start to think differently too. So you can go ahead and click on that as well. Now, it was great. I was very, very surprised because last weekend I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin at the Wellness Way's Leadership and Longevity Seminar. Guys, it was an absolutely jam-packed, awesome seminar, the best one to date. However, it was also a very busy time because 2 of our kids had proms, track meets, volleyball tournaments. And my wife, she does a twice yearly event, consignment sale that she runs, does an absolutely awesome, fantastic job. It was probably the worst week to get away, but obviously I had to be there, and I had the opportunity to be able to hear Del Bigtree be able to speak. Absolutely fantastic speaker. If you don't know him, Del Bigtree in the High Wire, make sure that you go and you search that out. He's probably been kicked off of YouTube. I'm just waiting for me to get kicked off of YouTube. Maybe after this broadcast I will, and I would be totally fine with it. But you see Del Bigtree, who is a champion in the Maha movement. I also had an opportunity to be able to see Mary Holland with the Children's Health Defense. And I have actually spoken for the Illinois chapter of the Children's Health Defense on numerous occasions. But Mary Holland is a champion for quote unquote vaccine research. You'd be absolutely amazed. She is just an absolutely plethora of information. And a actual huge advocate for, just having proper research when it comes to vaccines. And then I had the opportunity to be able to hear Alex Clark, who has Culture apothecary, or and she also has one of the leading um, podcasts, called The Spillover with Alex Clark. Does an absolutely fantastic job. So I had the great opportunity to be able to hear all of those speak. And you know what? When you hear them speak, even though I kind of knew all of the research that they went over, it's just something that made me pretty compassionate. I got pretty compassionate. And you're like, well, what on earth does that mean? Is that even a real word? No, not really. But if you combine compassion and getting pissed off, that's where I am. All right. So compassionate. I'm a very compassionate person because there are certain things that, yes, excuse my language, but it does piss me off quite a bit when I see children are hurt and I see them absolutely gaslighting moms who say my children have been hurt, and they say that doesn't happen, that's impossible for that to happen. Yet these people have seen it happen. They go over the research quite a bit, and that's why I get pretty compassionate anytime that I obviously hear this again. But I also see the large movement that's taking place with the injustices that have taken place, especially when it comes to our kids. But I did go home early. So just so you know, I did leave the seminar early on Saturday just so I could drive home and take pictures for my son's prom. So I know that my son, Talon, who's just an awesome individual, his girlfriend, Allison, they had prom on that night. So I drove home early just so that I could see them off, take pictures. And they had a really, really good time at prom. And I know that my son Talon's watching right now. So, hey, Talon, thank you so much for watching and being a huge supporter. But this is him and his girlfriend. And it's just absolutely amazing to see their growth and to see their development. I'm so happy for them. I'm so proud of them. And actually, Allison has quite the Wellness Way story, which is just really awesome. And I won't go into a lot of detail with it, but she's had quite the story. And so I'm so proud of her as well. So live question and answer. So guys, again, if you do have a question, make sure that you start asking that question so that it'll show up in our chat. Now, just so you know, if you are watching on Rumble, it won't show up on our chat, but it'll show up if you're on YouTube or on Facebook. That will show up definitely on the chat. I'll have a chance to be able to see that. So live question and answer, but I did get some questions that came through a little bit prematurely. So I wanted to talk about this while I wait for some extra questions on our chat. The first one is I did a video last week, talking about forward head posture, otherwise known as hyperkyphosis, otherwise known as the granny posture. Basically, the granny posture is the head going forward, getting the hump on the back. Here is an x-ray of it that I talked about last week. And if you missed that video from last week, I talked about this and all the changes that take place physiologically when you do have the granny posture or hyperkyphosis or forward head posture. Talked about how it causes, damage or arthritic change to the lower part of the neck, how it stretches the spinal cord, how it can cause gastrointestinal changes, how it puts the body in a chronic fight or flight, and also how it actually changes the vascular supply going back up into the head too. And it's associated with vascular changes that can be associated with an increase in atherosclerosis or plaquing of the arteries leading up to the brain. So someone asked the question, well, how do I fix or how do I prevent forward head posture? And guys, this is really a 3-hour discussion. However, I go over a couple of points when it comes to fixing or preventing forward head posture. Here's the easy answer. The easy answer is just don't get there. don't get there. And a lot of times people will ask me, and they almost say this like, I'm going to get you here. Like this is some kind of aha moment. But when you say, like, how often do you see this? Because people ask me this question, they say, how often do you see this? And really what they're trying to say is, oh, this is just normal, isn't it? So it's so common, it's just normal. It is so definitely common, but it's never, ever normal. It would be like saying, like you go ahead and you get a coronary artery calcium score and you got a 90% blockage and you look at your doctor and you would say, yeah, this is so common, I don't need to do anything about it. Even though that there's some major things that are happening and it's going to wreck your health if you don't start taking some massive action with it. But it's kind of like asking, how many people have cavities that have never brushed or flossed their teeth? So if you have someone who's never brushed their teeth, they never floss their teeth, guys, I brush my teeth 3 times a day. I floss every single day. But imagine if you had never done that, and then you're 30 years of age and then checking out your teeth and you just see how rotten and how decayed, you got gum disease that's going on, and then saying, oh, well, that's normal. Okay. Now, when you look at people and you look at their spines, one of the tragedies I see with people is that they don't start addressing it until they have some kind of obvious physical symptom that's going on. And guys, if you are addressing it because you have some kind of pain or anything like that, I tell people, I'm like, you should be smarter than that. You should be more mature than that. You should be working on building health and not just trying to treat quote unquote disease. And this is why you need to be doing certain things to make sure that, yes, number one, you make sure you never get there. But the other thing is too, is that if you are there, making sure that you're correcting it before it turns into some kind of degenerative nightmare. So how would you fix that? Well, the first thing that you would need is you need to look at an x-ray and be able to measure it. But how do we fix it, specifically in through the office? Now, I will tell you this, it's a lot easier to fix if you haven't had it for 35 years with degenerative disc disease and everything that's going on, all the physiological changes that take place as it tries to adapt to that position. But here's one of the things, when people say, well, how do you fix it? The first thing I would say is that not all chiropractors really even try to fix it. And so this is where you need to start with. Okay. The first thing that you need to start doing is and this is true because if you look at our You Don't Know Squat challenge, that we did about a year ago, and if you go to our Instagram page, go to the very top, I was like, here's what you need to do in order to start improving your squat. And it's almost like, prior to trying to regain mobility or anything like that, here's some of the things that you need to be doing. So number one, you have to start mixing the tissues. Well, what do you mean by that? So if you have this going on and through the neck, this is why, doing things like wobble chair or wobble cushion at home, or doing things like repetitive cervical traction, all it does is just starts to take the tissues and it starts to nourish them and it starts to heat them up, because tissues that are warm will move a whole heck of a lot better than if they're cold and rigid and have more of the consistency of concrete. So you have to start warming up the tissues. And once a person starts to warm up the tissues, and this is true even with shoulder issues and things like that, because we'll warm up the tissues by doing things like rapid release, which will put a high vibration into the area. And that will start to warm the tissues and get it ready, because the nerve system and the joints will be much more receptive towards doing things in order to start fixing it. So you mix it up and then you fix it, which in many cases, specifically with having the granny posture, this is adjusting people. And I know what people think, it's just like twisting your neck and doing that. No, it's not. So this mostly is trying to unlock the skull so that the head can start to retract, and doing some actually arthrostim type adjusting, which will start to set some of the spine back into motion a little bit. Yes, there may be like traction adjustments, things like that you may start to do. But the first thing is mix it up, start to get it to move, especially with forward head posture, and get the head to start to be able to retract a little bit better. But then the next thing you have to do is you have to set it. So you don't want more mobility with a lot of atrophy. And that's what happens with so many people, is they have a neck that's just so weak and it's atrophied. So then you got to set it afterwards and start strengthening it. And this is how, why head weighting. In fact, if you look over here, you see the picture of a person that's head weighting and putting a weight on the head, and that will cause the head to start to retract. But it's not going to work unless you start unlocking the skull to get the skull to start moving properly. And that's why head weighting can be so important. You can also do, if you're looking at full body weighting, this is true with scoliosis correction and things like that, or maybe even looking at a dendroll in order to stretch the ligaments over time, kind of like, putting braces on the teeth or wearing some kind of retainer, which is a lot slower response, but everybody's different. Everybody is unique. But the thing is that you have to start using the right formula in order to get that to start to respond and start to react. And in some people, it may take a year in order for that to start to get it corrected. But anytime I look at an x-ray, one of the first things that I'm looking at is, if you look at an x-ray, you want to ask the question, is there any kind of spinal cord tension? All right. Is there any kind of spinal cord tension? That's if you've lost curves, or if you have the head going in excessive forward head posture. Is there any kind of spinal cord tension? What I mean by that is because the spinal cord is tethered at the occiput, it's tethered down the lower part of the spine. And anytime that you start losing curves, the spinal cord will start to get tethered or start to get stretched. And this can get stretched right away if there's been any kind of birth trauma. Now, one of the things that's so interesting is if there's been a lot of birth trauma, the spinal cord gets tethered. Where people have they start getting into a really bad area is because once the spinal cord starts to get stretched and you start growing, the body says, I need to take some slack, put some slack into the spinal cord. And this is why the body will start to put curves. And in fact, if you look at a lot of research with scoliosis, a lot of them actually think that it can be due to some level of birth trauma, or it's caused by excessive spinal cord tethering, loss of curves, in which the body will start to put curves in the front in order to decrease a lot of the tension taking place in through the spinal cord, in through the nerve system. And in fact, it's doing that because if you look at people with scoliosis, you'll see the curve go away from the heart. Isn't that an amazing adaptation? Because the curve always goes away from the heart because the body wants to protect some of your vital organs. And yes, the heart is. And in fact, if the body is putting a curve and it's going into the heart, then usually there's some kind of spinal cord tumor or something like that. So you're looking at, has there been a history of birth trauma? Is there some level of spinal cord tension that's going on? And the other thing too is if you are seeing a lot of curves, especially in the lower part of the back, has there been any history of any kind of lower extremity trauma? And what I mean by that is, have you had any kind of fracture to the femur, fracture to the tibia, some of the weight-bearing bones while you are still growing? And that's one of the reasons why for some people we'll do a leg length x-ray on them. Because if you've had any kind of trauma to the femur, to the thigh bone, or to the tibia, which is the shin bone, and you are still growing, that can cause that bone, as it starts to fuse, to grow longer on one side versus the other. And then you're just essentially walking with maybe a leg length inequality of 6 millimeters, 9 millimeters. The largest I've seen is 36 millimeters, and there was a history of trauma to that area. So that's why it's very, very important that you are getting this corrected, because the body wants, you want a straight spine, not necessarily a level pelvis. This is why I don't really do leg checks or anything like that. I just think they're just absolutely stupid unless I know if they have some kind of leg length issue that's going on. Because if you have a lengthened leg because you've had trauma to that area and the chiropractor is doing like leg checks or something like that, well, then you're always going to be off. And then to even it out, you actually have to do something really bad to the pelvis. You actually have to induce dysfunction in the pelvis in order to get the hips to start to even out. And that's why I don't like leg checks at all. Now, the other thing too is that I want you to understand is there's something that's known as the writing reflex. The eyes always want to be level with the horizon, and this is why if people start going into this position, you'll never see them look down. In fact, they'll look up. This is also why if you hurt your neck and like in this position, you don't see people walking around like this. And in fact, over time, what you'll see happen is the eyes will say, I need to right myself to with the horizon. And that's why you'll see that the eyes will start to level out, but they'll have to induce some level of curve in through the neck or in through the middle part of the spine just in order to start to balance that out. That's why, I see this all the time. If you're walking around, you see a person's shoulders unlevel, then that's actually an adaptation to having some level of spinal trauma, because the body never wants to do this. It wants to do this instead. And that's why you'll see higher shoulders on one side versus the other. So you really have to be working with someone who knows what they're doing in order to start getting that to change. So mix it up, fix it up, and set it. Okay. Now, I want you guys to know this because I hear people say this all the time. Posture is subconscious because they're like, I'm trying to be very aware of my posture. You cannot do that. I want you to think of this. You think about your posture for 20 seconds out of the day, and posture is something that is being influenced 100% of time, and it's all subconscious. So posture is subconscious, and it should be corrected subconsciously. Like you can't like change it by just like retracting your head or anything like that. And you have to do it subconsciously, which is why we'll put certain weights on people and the body just reacts to that at a subconscious level. And then you go on a vibration platform, after that, and it just starts to create kind of an unstable environment, which causes your nerve system to start to respond. All that stuff is great. But if you're not mixing it and you're not working on fixing it, then trying to set it afterwards is going to have a very limited effect. And that's why posture has to be corrected subconsciously. And in fact, it should be corrected as quickly as possible and not wait until there's massive degenerative changes that are taking place. All right, guys. So if you got a question, go ahead and leave it in the comments. But the next question that I had, too, and this sparked, I wanted to talk about this because I heard a lot about this, this weekend, especially. Dr. Nate, which vaccines do you give your children? And I remember I did a video on this, and man, did people got crazy. Holy cow, I got really, really worked up in regards to that. Just remember this. If it works you up, usually there's some level of uncertainty that's taken place. So I don't get angry, about this. However, I've changed my mind, in regards to this, because when I was growing up, I remember hearing it's the crazy chiropractors who are anti-vax, and whatnot. And then you have to figure out, well, why are we so crazy? So, Dr. What vaccines do you give your children? And I'll answer this. I've given them all of them, all of the ones that have had a proper safety study that involves an inert placebo, otherwise known as saline, which comes to the grand total of zero. Zero. So when they say, which ones do you give your children? I'm like, all the ones that have had a proper safety study done, which means that it's zero. And this surprises a lot of people because I remember I had an MD who started getting really, really sassy with me online. I said, go over and send me all your studies. And he's like, I have tons of them. He sent me 3 studies and every single one did not involve placebo. He just didn't know how to read the study. So they didn't involve any kind of placebo whatsoever. And in fact, when you're doing a safety study, you have to involve a placebo. But in fact, all the other ones that they've done, they basically have taken, an active vaccine and then but they never use a placebo. And that's no different than being like, like, let's look at the safety study of alcohol. And we measured, 9 shots of tequila. And then we also tested 9 shots of tequila and 9 shots of vodka, and both of them had a pretty similar safety profile, in regards to that. But that's not science. Science involves a placebo. And if you look at the vaccines, none of them have involved any kind of placebo or testing against any kind of saline or something like that. So I've given my kids zero. And you would have thought my kids would just be some kind of, disease laden children having all kinds of issues, and whatnot. These are 3 of my kids. This is kind of an outdated photo because 2 of my kids are now bigger than me. And then this is Elias, who is riding his truck like a boss. And he is 2 years of age, but they've gotten zero. And if you look at how a lot of medical doctors talk, my kids should be dead by now. However, the really, really cool thing is I don't fear a virus. And I'll tell you what I fear more than that. But if you look at my kids, they don't suffer any of the chronic health conditions that I suffer from, because for me growing up, I suffered with terrible allergies, terrible asthma. No one could figure out why I was doing that. And you know what? When I stopped injecting things into my body, gave it a couple of years, boy, my immune system started calming down and I no longer suffer with asthma, but no one could figure that out. So I give my kids zero. Zero. And this kind of rides the coattails of what the Washington Post reported on. And this was last week. RFK Jr. will order placebo testing for any new vaccines. And it alarms health experts. If you're a health expert and you're alarmed at that, maybe you should have known what the actual research studies were actually doing. But RFK is just saying, just do a proper placebo study. You need to make sure that you are doing that, because none of them have any kind of proper placebo study. So he's just asking you to do what's known as a proper safety study or proper science. I don't know why it just, just alarms people so much. But when people say, aren't you afraid of this, or this? I'm like, nope, I'm not afraid of it. I don't fear a virus. But what I fear the most is that my kids have an inadequate immune system. And I have tested my children's immune system before. Their immune systems are awesome, amazing. But if you look at them, and in fact, all my kids have actually had whooping cough, by the way. They've had whooping cough. And in fact, I also had whooping cough back in last late June, early July, and I had been vaccinated for pertussis. Interesting, right? But yes, they did have a cough because it was their initial exposure. I'm not afraid of them having pertussis. I'm not afraid of them having measles. I'm not afraid of them having those things. I'm not afraid of those things because if there was a 100% death rate, then 100% of people would die from the virus. But in fact, if you look at any kind of virus, who are the ones that are getting the most effective, who can't mount a proper antibody response, who can't mount a proper immune system response? The ones who have inadequacies of their immune system. And my children don't have inadequacies of their immune system, only because they've been adjusted since birth. They've been exclusively breastfed for the first year of their life. None of them suffer with obesity or blood sugar issues or anything like that. So I don't fear a virus. And in fact, I don't fear them getting sick. They may get sick. They're going to if they have first exposure to any kind of pathogen. And I know and have faith that they're going to have a proper immune system response that comes from this. But if you look at my kids, I grew up with terrible asthma. None of my kids have asthma. They take no medications for chronic disease. And what's even more interesting too, because I think a lot of times chronic inflammation can cause a lot of issues with eye health and things like that. But none of them even wear glasses, even though my wife and I needed glasses at 12 years of age, but none of my kids wear glasses even. So they even have good eye health, especially. So I'm happy that my kids have health because it's one of the best gifts that I can give to them is them actually having great, great health. But just like going back to, I don't fear a virus. I don't fear a bacteria. What I fear is them having an insufficient immune system response. And this takes me back to something that I had talked about on our Make Immune System Strong Again webinar that was banned by YouTube. You can find it on Rumble. But if you look at this, non-bivalent COVID-19 boosters fail to protect against Omicron in patients with autoimmune rheumatic diseases. This is what's so interesting because, you look at this and I'm like, I'm just a chiropractor, but this would make sense for me too. And they said that patients with autoimmune rheumatic diseases often fail to mount an effective response useful in preventing Omicron breakthrough infections, according to the Annals of the Rheumatic Diseases. One of the things that they found is when people have autoimmunity, and I won't even go into why I believe so many people have autoimmunity today, but if they have some kind of autoimmune condition, then one of the things doctors do, rather than try to figure out why the immune system is responding that way, they just put them on things to modulate the immune system or to just basically just destroy the immune system so that they can't even have any kind of inflammatory response. But remember this, if you're going to have an effective response to any kind of vaccine, you still need an immune system that's working. But one of the things they find is these people with autoimmune rheumatic diseases that are on steroids, they would give them a booster and nothing would happen. They would fail to have any kind of antibody response from it. And in fact, they couldn't figure this out. And you would think that this would make sense to them. And rather than be like, hey, maybe we're causing this because, for those people, once they're knocking out the immune system, they could be potentially bowled over by any virus. And that's why when you look at these on commercials for some of these type of medications, that's why they say, don't take it if you have tuberculosis, or this can cause some kind of infection. Long-term use can even cause cancer because cancer can be caused by a deficiency of the immune system with certain type of immune system cells not being able to chew away at a tumor, especially. So they were recommending a fourth dose of COVID-19 mRNA vaccine for patients on immunosuppressants. The American College of Rheumatology has updated its COVID-19 vaccine clinical guidance for patients with rheumatic disease to recommend a fourth mRNA vaccine dose in patients receiving immunosuppressive or immunomodulatory therapy. So rather than say, hey, maybe we should just figure out, kind of the what we're doing here, let's just give them more of it, and which is what I would call the beatings continuing until morale improves. You can't make this stuff up, all right? So next question too. So I just said 0. They've gotten 0, and I have no problems with my kids getting sick because I know their immune system's strong. They'll get over it, and you know what? Once they get over it, they have a lifetime of the immune system. They don't need boosters, at that point. But I also think there is a tremendous benefit by growing their immune system by having exposure to certain childhood illnesses. Okay. And I personally believe God didn't mess up. All right. I think that what doctors do is what messes up children's immune systems more than anything else. We've been given so much bad advice, saying that, breastfeeding is not important. Oh, like formula is just as good, you know, um, and just what we do growing up. And so I've gone completely counterculture, and I have 4 healthy kids to prove it. Next question that I had that someone asked me is, Dr. Nate, what wrecks a man's testosterone? What will wreck a man's testosterone? And here's what I say, because I could talk about this for hours, but I'll say some of the biggest things that are causing problems with a man's testosterone is number one, body fat. Body fat. In fact, fat cells are just not like inert cells. They can actually become endocrine organs in and of themselves. And one of the things that an excessive amount of body fat will do is that it will take testosterone, and there will be a conversion into estradiol. And it's called aromatase, which is the enzyme. So it will take the testosterone a man is making, and it will aromatase it into estradiol, which is why if you look at a man with higher body fat, you will see that they'll have higher estradiol levels. And the question you have to ask is what is causing so much body fat in men? And it's processed food. A lot of times it's just sugar, it's grains, things like that. Highly processed food. It's not broccoli, guys. So having a lot of body fat will wreck a man's testosterone. Number two, having a lot of chronic stress will wreck a man's testosterone too, which is why you always want to see, is there any kind of immune system triggers that are doing on chronic infection, mold mycotoxicity, things like that. And it's not an acute stress that influences a man's testosterone. It's actually a chronic stress that just starts to beat them down. But there can also be a neurological response as well. For example, if you look at things like traumatic brain injuries, if someone's had a traumatic brain injury from being in a car accident, or if they've had traumatic brain injury from chronic concussions and things like that, brain injuries can absolutely start to damage the neurological pathways in order to induce some of the stimulatory hormones that go to the pituitary that then are stimulating the testicles to be able to produce testosterone. So yes, it can be a neurological issue. There's no doubt about it. And that's why if you've seen people who have had traumatic brain injuries after a car accident, you will see that their testosterone can absolutely go down. And a lot of times it may not recover for a couple of years until the neurology just can start to reorganize itself as well. But this is also, there have been frequent concussions. And I have seen special forces who come back, and suffering traumatic brain injuries with some of the things that they were doing, during wartime, coming back and seeing that their testosterone was just absolutely tanked, at that point. So that's why you have to start looking at excessive body fat, chronic stress. And here's the thing, sleep is important, but sleep does not influence a man's testosterone as much as people believe. Maybe 10% or no, or not, because most of a man's testosterone production is happening at the testicles and not at the adrenals. And that's what's getting really, really stressed if a person is under a high amount of stress or not getting enough sleep. Okay. So this is why, guys, it's not as simple as just taking testosterone boosting supplements, because people will ask me all the time, it's just like, oh, Mucuna seed, astragalus, tribulus. And it's not just as simple as doing that. In fact, if a man comes in with low testosterone, I'll recommend nothing in order to improve their testosterone. And the only reason why is because, things like tribulus or passion flower or some of those things all work differently. And so one of the things you really need to do is you need to start getting the lifestyle under control and see how it starts to level out and see how it starts to respond. But this whole idea of going to GNC, and having some high schooler who's going to let you know, oh, this is good, guys, this is why, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But if a person will clean up their lifestyle, and you'll start to see it pick up, you'll start to see it improve. And if they're willing to keep their lifestyle in check, they're willing to start stimulating the body in order to lift heavy weights and things like that, then yes, after you do some post-testing, you can get a better idea of some of the things that are going to start helping them out. But this is why I would not be running to doing testosterone boosting supplements. This is why I don't recommend that you run off, and you start working with some kind of like remote lab online, and they're just going to send you testosterone to the pharmacy and you're just going to blindly take it. This is why you really need to start cleaning up your lifestyle, especially. Somebody asked me this too, because they actually reached out and they called us as if they were shocked. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I have osteoporosis. Can I still get adjusted?" uh, the answer is yes, you can, guys. Yes, you can. You can be you if you have osteoporosis, it's not a death sentence. However, one of the things I want to ask is who led you to it? Who led you to osteoporosis? Because if you've had a doctor taking care of you over the last 30 years, then obviously their advice is one of the things that actually led you to it, of having really, really poor bone mass. And in fact, it's like if you have osteoporosis, really it started probably from a young age. And this is why I tell people you need to be on a strength training program from even a young age. You should be actually stressing your bones. You probably need proper stomach acid, for good protein absorption, for good calcium absorption. And this is why too. One of the things that I've noticed is that it's the very thin, very frail women who have the most osteoporosis, only because estradiol does play a role in it. And if you actually do carry a little bit more fat mass, it will actually lend to your bone mass a little bit more too. So I'm not saying that you need to be obese, but you also should probably be eating more than just a piece of lettuce and an almond, every day, because that can cause you to have a lot of issues. But the question is if you're surprised that you have osteoporosis, my question is, well, who led you into that position? Who led you to it? Chances are it was the doctor you're taking advice who actually led you to it. So there's some good things that you can do in order to improve your bone mass. And that's why getting on some kind of weightlifting program, also vibration, a Vibe platform is something that can help with bone mass, or doing, weighted walking, with a weighted vest or something that can help to improve bone mass. There's a lot of different things that you can do. But if you're alarmed that your doctor now says that you have osteoporosis, ask them, well, why did you lead me down this path? Because chances are doctors only treat. They're not doing anything in regards to prevention. They're just waiting until you have it before they can start treating you, with some kind of drug or medication, which I don't recommend. Okay. So let's go over a couple of questions that we have from from our comments. It looks like we got some questions that are coming in. Julie, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Deanne, she was at the Wellness Way Leadership and Longevity Seminar last year. Dell was absolutely phenomenal, and he was phenomenal this year as well. So miss seeing you there. Hope everything is well. And then I just showed you a picture of this gentleman, Talon. How do you recommend to lose fat and preserve muscle effectively? That's a great question, Talon. See, I told you he's watching. And if this is coming from you, all right, who wants to do a cut, the best way that I would say to lose fat, preserve muscle effectively, is that number one, work on decreasing your calories. Okay. Now you just can't out fitness it by just exercising more, but you need to decrease your calories. You know what the easiest way to decrease your calories is? Get rid of any kind of processed food. Okay. So get rid of your processed food. And then the other thing too, in order to preserve your muscle mass, is make sure that you continue working out, make sure that you continue lifting, and then also make sure you eat enough protein. We actually take people through detox. I've seen people lose 25 or 30 pounds, but during that time, and they're not even trying to lose weight. But one of the things that you have to do is you have to make sure that you keep their protein levels up, because if you don't get enough protein, your body can start pulling away muscle mass in order to kind of compensate for some of the calorie restriction. And we're not actually trying to restrict calories, but when you start getting rid of anything that's processed, any kind of grains or any kind of processed foods, packaged foods, things like that, you'll realize it's a lot harder to be any kind of calorie surplus. And in fact, one of the things where people can get it so wrong is when they just start eating packaged foods. I mean, my goodness, have 4 Oreos and then compare it to a plate of broccoli. You'll see such a huge difference between those two. So Deanne, who was at the Wellness Way Leadership and Longevity Seminar last year, Plastiba said it should have been done from the beginning. They never were. Okay. It's tobacco science. They never were. And people are actually, they're surprised at that. And in fact, most medical doctors think that they're all are properly have any kind of safety study. And in fact, if you guys know Nicole Selesky, who is a nurse practitioner, who is starting up her own practice in Green Bay called Eden. Um, and she said, when I was going through nurse practitioner school, they just told us that it was all safe, it was all studied, and I didn't realize. I just took their word for it. Um, and she's like, I was absolutely flabbergasted at the dearth of research as far as safety studies and things like that. Because just remember this: if you're never ever using a placebo, then what you're doing is you're potentially testing something that could cause an injury versus something that could also cause an injury. And then what happens is you look at those two studies, like, well, we didn't see a change in injuries, and so they must both be safe. So, that's why when RFK doing it, and I know that a lot of social media influencers have given him, just talked absolute crap, about it. And it's just like, you don't understand, do you? You think that RFK is someone who is stupid. He's not. he is not at all. Um, and so I think sometimes he's just probably trolling some of those people who are, who are up in arms, and whatnot. But I know that if you look at social media, there's a lot of people up in arms with him talking about autism and said, we're going to try to figure out the cause of autism because here's what's happening. And people are saying, I don't care. I enjoy my autism. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because when you look at, because I saw a story of a whole entire family and of triplets, all three of them regress into autism within hours of each other after getting a certain jibby jabby, within hours. And those kids are not going to all regress if it's, if it just happens just to be um, um, genetic, not going to happen within hours of one another. But there was something that happened around the same time frame, and that's what she said. She said, if this was genetic, why did it all happen on the same day within hours of each other? I literally watched my children change before my eyes, and it absolutely destroyed them because of what happens as a result of them literally for the rest of their life being in diapers, being not being able to speak. And this just absolutely wrecks people's life. And anybody who just says that it's not true, you're just gaslighting. And I would just, please stop it. We did that with tobacco science, for the longest period of time. They're still trying to do it now. So I'm just happy that someone is willing to stand in the gap and say, we're going to try to give you some answers here. Okay. All right, guys, any other questions? Any other questions that we have? I'll be able to answer maybe one or two more. So if you have a question, go ahead, make sure that you answer that. And guys, if you're watching right now and you're from the Chicagoland area, you want to work with us directly because you have a health problem that you have not been able to solve on your own. Maybe your doctor has not been able to solve it on their own. And you are tired of doing the same thing over and over, and you need a different perspective. Make sure you get registered for our next inflammation event. Tuesday, May 20th at 6 o'clock p.m. This is an in-person event. And we're going to talk about help bridge the gap, how inflammation is literally the spark that leads to every single chronic degenerative disease out there. But a lot of people don't know what inflammation is. They certainly don't know where it's coming from. And I'll help you bridge that gap so that here is where I need to start. So make sure that you get registered for that right now. Okay. And all you have to do is just click on our Linktree profile. You'll see it there. It'll pop up first. The inflammation event. You go ahead and click on that. Take you 60 seconds to register for that free event. All right. All right, guys. So next week is Mother's Day. I'll be going live as I always do. And I don't know what the topic is. We'll see, what it is. Maybe some trending health topics, or whatnot. But I'll be going live next week, Monday, around 6:30, 7 o'clock p.m. So guys, if you have a topic you have in mind, please make sure you just put it in the comments below and I'll definitely consider that. So guys, I hope you have an awesome, awesome rest of your night. Thank you so much, Talon, for your question. Thank you so much for watching. You're a good kid. I love you very much. And we'll see you guys next week. But make sure that if you don't follow us, make sure that you follow us, subscribe, so that you're updated on current events and that you just stay abreast of everything that we're doing in order to start changing healthcare for the better. So guys, We will see you guys very soon. Be well, be blessed. And as I always say, remember who you are.